Hello, and welcome to this Getting Started with SharePoint Framework tutorial series. In this tutorial, we're looking into how to add jQueryUI Accordion to your SharePoint client-side WebPart. The purpose of this tutorial is mainly to show how to reference additional JavaScript libraries in your client-side WebParts or SharePoint Framework extension. So what are the steps of actually adding the third-party or additional JavaScript library or a component to your WebPart or extension, and then what are the steps of using that customization together with WebPart. This tutorial is relatively simple, so we're only adding the jQuery UI accordion to the WebPart, and we're also testing that behavioral functionality within the local workbench. So we're not going to actually associate any live SharePoint data to that jQuery accordion, but the whole point is to actually reference these third-party or reference the jQuery components and start using them within your solution. This is the September 2018 edition, so please follow up on any updates what we're putting on our written articles on the videos. So we keep on evolving these articles as we move along and releasing new versions of SharePoint Framework. But let's jump right into it. So first of all, this tutorial is meant to be used or created as an independent tutorial. So please do not run the Yeoman generator on top of the existing potential Hello World WebPart solution, which might have already walked through. So make sure that you're in a similar location as I am. So my D tutorials is the location where all of the tutorial solutions are meant to actually locate. And in here, I'm going to actually create jQuery WebPart folder, and then I'm going to jump on the jQuery WebPart folder, and in here I'm going to run the Microsoft SharePoint, so the SharePoint Framework Yeoman templates. And now let's follow up on the tutorial guidance. So let's use the default name as provided based on a folder. We're going to target SharePoint Online as an environmental option. We're going to use the current folder because we are already at the jQuery WebPart folder. And then the question around the tenant scope deployment. In this case, we want to actually, well, it doesn't really matter because we're only using this WebPart in a local workbench, but we will say now for no for this one. We are building a WebPart, so let's choose that one. Let's call this jQuery as a jQuery WebPart, and then jQuery WebPart as the description. And in this case, because we do not have a jQuery framework as by default available in the selection of the framework, we're gonna choose no JavaScript framework. And that doesn't mean that we would be not actually using React or Knockout or Angular elements or Vue or whatever. It means that we get a default solution structure from where we can then start installing whatever additional dependencies what we want. So in this case, we're adding here jQuery and jQuery UI components in the following steps, but just as well, you could actually use Angular or Vue or whatever additional frameworks as well. So let's actually start the scaffolding. So the scaffolding does take a while, obviously depending on the network capabilities and the computer what you're using. So we're going to speed up the video at this point and continue with following steps when the scaffolding is completed. And here we go. Excellent. Now the scaffolding is completed, and we wanted to build something based on a jQuery. So we want to first run here a command, npm install. So we're installing a new package from the npm gallery called jQuery. And in this case, we want to install jQuery version 2. So we're going to use the jQuery add2 as the command. And at this point, we're going to pull down the jQuery 2 as a package and associate that inside, well, get it available inside of this solution. And there we go. The next step, we wanted to use jQueryUI Accordion. So let's actually install the jQuery UI here as well, because the jQueryUI Accordion is part of that package from the npm. So let's install that one, do the solution as well. Now we have those two new JavaScript external packages available in the solution, but since we want to write our stuff using TypeScript, we want to actually also have the types for these packages available. So let's actually install those as well. So npm install types / jQuery, and we wanted to have jQuery 2 types. So that's adding then the types available. So within the TypeScript development, we get a nice intelligence for the available components, available functionalities. And we're going to use the same or run the same, pretty much the same command for jQuery UI as well. So it will be the npm install at types and jQuery UI. And since pulling down the packages will take always every now and then some time, and we're going to speed up the video whenever these commands are actually executed. Okay, here we go. Now we have installed the npm packages and the types for those npm packages. Now, by default, the SharePoint Framework solutions, they actually bundle all of the code inside of the solution. And the bundling means that the dependent code is included in the JavaScript files, which are then compiled or transcompiled from TypeScript to the JavaScript. So on runtime in the browser, obviously it is JavaScript, but when we do development, it is TypeScript. So we get the intelligence and all of that stuff available, all the goodies for development time experience. Now, the bundling means that whenever we compile or transcompile the package, so whenever we optimize the JavaScript files to be available for consumption, we include the jQuery in this case and jQuery UI components inside of the JavaScript file, which is basically this WebPart. Now, in certain cases, that is actually a good thing to do. So, for example, if you are using Office UI Fabric React components, we actually recommend you to do so, because there might be breaking changes in the newer versions of those components. And if you reference dynamically the Office UI Fabric components from a CDN or from a page or in a SharePoint page, because we use those components in SharePoint, there might be a breaking change. So bundling the code inside of your JavaScript bundle means that you have everything what your code is dependent on inside of the JavaScript. So that means that your solution is completely independent. In this case, however, we're talking about jQuery and jQuery UI, and these components are actually available also from the CDN. And this means that we can actually reference them dynamically from CDN rather than bundling them inside of the JavaScript solution. And that is much more efficient, because now if we reference that file from a CDN, it's not inside of the actual JavaScript bundle, including this jQuery WebPart solution. Now, let's actually quickly have a look on how this is configured and what it looks like inside of the solution. So in here, we can actually see that we are referencing inside of the bundles. We're referencing the jQuery and jQuery WebPart code. And right now we do not have any external components. Now, we want to actually add two new external components inside of the external section. And this basically means that even though we use the code inside of our solution, we do not want to bundle the code inside of our bundle. So we don't want to package the code, like said, inside of our JavaScript files. And that's going to minimize then the actual the actual size of the solution, because we want to reference this dynamically again from a URL. Now, and the next thing what we want to do, we want to actually build the accordion. So in this case, the accordion will be static. So we're going to basically just create a new accordion file. So let me actually extend the WebPart folder. There's our web parts, there's our jQuery, and let's actually create a new file here and call this my accordion template TS. And in here, we're going to copy the template, which is available from the tutorial. So this is just an HTML template with the div markers and a section and a section and section. So basically, it's a selection of divs, and then the jQueryUI accordion will then make this pretty and activate, so to say, the functionality. Now, we obviously want to import this in our WebPart. So let's move into the WebPart side. We want to use that file and a component in our WebPart. So we're going to actually import my accordion template from that my accordion template file, which we just created. So let me actually save that one, Control S, and also Control S from here, so that there's no surprises of missing saving, which I personally tend to forget every now and then. So let me actually then import, add here imports for the jQuery. So we're adding imports for the jQuery, which we referenced in the config.json file. So in here we are calling jQuery, that jQuery min file as a jQuery, and jQueryUI min file as jQueryUI. So we're able to then reference these inside of the code as well from jQuery and import jQueryUI. Now, what we then want to do is that we want to actually reference we want to actually load the needed styling automatically, and we want to actually, what we want to do is that we want to add a constructor for this web part. So let me actually add a constructor here, and we're using the component loader. And to be able to do so, we need to also import the component loader from the Microsoft SP Loader. And what this means is that on runtime, we're loading basically the CSS reference from the external location. Now, next steps is basically then including or implementing the actual render method. So let's actually modify the render method slightly. We want to first of all override the existing render method. So getting rid of that one. And then in the render method, we want to override the render method based on the existing settings. So let's actually see what are we doing here. So that's my accordion template. So if I do that had the template HTML. So basically this one is referencing in here. So there is a public static property which is template HTML. So we get the HTML inside of the web part. Then we're using jQueryUI accordion options, and these are options and a code which is documented in the jQueryUI documentation. So we're able to say what is the header, what is the active header, is it collapsible, is it animated or not. So there's multiple different kind of a UI components what the jQueryUI is providing. And then we're using jQuery, and we are injecting in the accordion type the accordion options. So basically we're using jQuery then together with jQueryUI to make this template activated. So here we see a div class accordion, and we're pinpointing to that accordion and those accordion options, and that will then associate the jQueryUI activities or functionalities to be available inside of the UI, inside of the web part. So what it means then is that now the needed changes are available. We referenced our code, we added the NPM packages, we defined those as an external ones to be still included in our solution in this case. We also associate a CSS from CDN. So we download that CSS from a CDN on runtime, and we have the template available. So let me move back on the command line. And in the command line, let me actually clear some stuff. There we go. So now in the command line, if we open up the browser, so let me actually make sure that we're opening up on the right location. So here we go, sppmp is the location. Well, technically, in this case, we don't even want to use the sppmp tenant. I just want to make sure that we're opening up that particular web part or a workbench in this browser session. So depending on operating system what you're using, at least in Windows, if you have multiple different, for example, profiles in Google Chrome, depending on which browser you're using, you can actually decide which browser window is the one where you want the workbench or local workbench or the debug URLs to be created or initiated as a new tab. So now that I'm actually doing a one refresh on this page, it's going to remember that. So when I go back in my command line for that web part and we do call observe and we execute that, it's going to pop up now a new tab in that particular process session. So in my computer right now, I have quite a few different profiles running, but by activating that window, we were able to make sure that the loading happens in here. And now we're using the local workbench, and in the local workbench, we should see our jQuery WebPart. In the jQuery WebPart, we have the Accordion available, and it has nice functionalities related on what we basically provided as a configuration. The text itself is right now coming, it's a static text in the component, the Accordion component, or the HTML, which was included in the template which we provided. Obviously, you could get this information from an existing SharePoint list relatively easily by running or using the SharePoint REST APIs and accessing that information and then exposing that using the Accordion way. But that's all what we're going to do in this tutorial. So hopefully you find that useful, and please keep on watching the other tutorials as well. Thank you.